All of my content is also posted on 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, including articles, podcasts, and custom Magic the Gathering tokens and playmats. As a subscriber to my channel, you can use the discount code NEEDSAHONE5 for a 5% discount in their store. You can find the link in the description below. Hello everyone and welcome to the October 2016 edition of Commander on a Budget. I'm NEEDSAHONE and I post a budget deck every month here on my YouTube channel that is under $100 in paper and usually also under about 50 tickets online. This particular deck about $95 in paper and under 20 tickets online. And the deck this month is Depala Pilot Exemplar. You, the viewers, my subscribers, voted on her to be the commander between both a Twitter poll and in last month's YouTube videos, comments you posted that you wanted to see Depala more than anything else. But Padim, the Console of Innovation, finished very closely in second place, and as a result, next month I will be doing Padim, since a lot of people wanted to see that as well. But today we're doing Depala from Kaladesh. She's a pretty straightforward commander. Basically, you want to play a bunch of dwarves and you want to play a bunch of vehicles because she not only pumps them, she also lets you draw a bunch of cards in the later part of the game whenever she crews a vehicle or attacks, because most of the cards in this deck are either vehicles or dwarves. So she lets you grab those if you have in the late game when you need a mana sink, and that's pretty amazing. You don't just get one card like is usually the case with these effects. You get as many as you want. So sometimes she can draw you a massive number of cards and just win you the game that way. As usual, I have things divided into various piles based on the different roles they have in the deck. Here I have basically just cards that are staples, cards I would put in most commander decks that are red and white. For example, we have Swords to Plowshares. It's a nice, cheap, both money-wise and mana-wise, removal spell. Skull Clamp, of course, is great. Draws you cards, pumps your guys too. Soul Ring, don't need to talk about that. Journey to Nowhere is a really great budget staple that is sort of like, it's like a more expensive Path to Exile that's a little more fragile, but if you don't want to spend $11 on Path, there you go. Chaos Warp can deal with any permanent, and that's pretty great. Collective Effort is a recent card that I like a lot because in this deck, in any deck with a lot of creatures, it can frequently do all three modes, which will frequently get you a 2-for-1 in Commander, where there's frequently enchantments. Oblivion Ring, of course, just a lot like Banishing Light. Crib Swap is in here because it's good in general in Commander, but it's even better in this deck because we can draw it with Depala's ability. Austere Command, just a great sweeper. Sometimes it can just win you games because you can sort of craft the Austere Command to destroy your opponent's board and not affect yours. And Tragic Arrogance lets you do that to an even greater extent, where you can keep your best permanent of each type and make them keep their worst one. Okay, so this pile is all dwarves, except for this Banishing Light that should be over here. This pile is all dwarves. So that shows you we have 30 dwarves in the deck. So that means, a third of our deck is stuff Depala can grab. Plus we also have some vehicles we'll talk about later. And actually we have a few more dwarves over here, which I'll talk about later in a moment too. But let's go through these dwarves. There are actually even more dwarves available if you make this deck in paper. But Homeland is not on Magic Online, and there's a dwarf sub-theme in that set. So I don't get to use Homeland. But there's still plenty of dwarves around thanks to Kaladesh. We've got Aviary Mechanic. We have some cards with Enter the Battlefield abilities that it's good with, and it's also just a dwarf. Gearshift Ace is great because it's both a dwarf and it gives vehicles first strike, both things you want to be doing in this deck. Ninth Bridge Patrol, just gets bigger when your creatures die or get bounced or whatever. Dwarven Blast Miner. Dwarves sort of have this, older dwarves anyway, could blow up lands, so we have a couple who can do that, and it's a pretty powerful ability actually in Commander, because especially against 3, 4, 5 color commanders, you can really screw them off their mana and buy yourself time. And Dwarven Miner does the same thing, same cost and everything. He is just a little bit bigger, so you can also play this as a morph, but you almost never do. Firebelly Changeling. We have lots of Changelings in this deck because Depala can grab them and pump them. Not an amazing card, but when you need dwarves, Firebelly Changeling can do it for you. Veteran Motorist is another very good card because it both is a dwarf and it likes vehicles. Toolcraft Exemplar, a dwarf who likes artifacts, all things we do. We have Dwergar Mine Captain, who can help us when we're going wide to do even more damage. Dwergar Hedge Mage is actually a really good card, and if you're in a red-white deck of any kind, and you are running a lot of mountains and plains, you should probably run this because 3 mana, destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, 2/2 bodies, actually kind of ridiculous. So that's sort of a card I discovered making this deck and forgot existed, but is actually pretty good. Torian Mauler is our best changeling. It just gets bigger and bigger when our opponents play spells. Dwarven Vigilantes is a 3 mana 2/2 who, when it hits the opponent, you can redirect 2 damage to one of your opponent's creatures. It's not amazing, but it is a dwarf. Dwarven Thaumaturgist is sort of like a utility creature. Occasionally switching creatures' power and toughness is relevant. Also a dwarf. Balthor the Stout is the original dwarf legend, but he doesn't actually pump dwarves. He pumps barbarians, and he can give barbarians fire breathing. We don't have a ton of barbarians in our deck, but we do have a few because we have changelings. Dwarven Nomad can make small creatures unblockable. Aerial Responder, of course, the new very powerful card in Limited that's good in this deck as well. Mirror Entity, another very good changeling. I guess it could contend with Tori and Mauler. Can just sort of end the game sometimes. Master Trinketeer, one of our new cards, helps us go wide by creating servos and pumps those servos. Glint Sleeve Artisan, one of the Fabricate creatures, can go wide or just be a 3/3. Fairgrounds Warden, another very good recent dwarf who, Oblivion rings something when it comes into play. Avian Changeling, just a 2/2, a Wind Drake who's a dwarf, basically. Whip Keeper, 4 mana for a 1/1's terrible, but its ability is actually relevant sometimes. It really creates some problems on the board for an opponent when they want to be able to block something and they just can't do it because of Whip Keeper. Warspike Changeling, another Changeling. Dwergar Cave Guard, nice because it has Wither and Fire Breathing, which is nice. Changeling Berserker, so I have a couple Changelings who champion creatures, and this is actually a pretty good effect because you can get rid of some creature from the board that's not relevant, but it also means that when this creature dies, that creature returns to the battlefield, meaning that if a board sweeper happens, I at least get to keep one creature. Bomb Squad is kind of a fun card. It has a lot of text. Basically, you can put fuse counters on things, and once a fuse counter is on a creature, they get a fuse counter every upkeep, and then whenever they get to 4, that creature is destroyed and it deals 4 damage to its controller. Sometimes on a board stall, Bomb Squad can just be exactly what you need. Visionary Augmenter, another dude with Fabricate, can help you go wide or just be a 4/3. Console Shield Guard, the only card with energy in our deck, but it can make energy so that we can make our attacking creatures indestructible. Our other, Changeling Sentinel, also pretty good. This is our other Changeling with Champion, a creature. So there aren't a ton of Dwarven tribal payoffs. There's one here, of course. And this pile is all the Dwarf payoffs we have in the deck. One of the sweetest, especially with Depala, is Dwarven Blood Boiler. He lets you tap any dwarf to give any creature +2/+0. So you can actually even give it to vehicles, which is nice. And if you tap Depala with it, you can trigger her ability if you want to. Dwarven Recruiter, also really good with Depala because you can rig your deck and then, tap Depala and get 12 dwarves off the top of your deck, which is pretty nice. Adaptive Automaton, this would be in basically any tribal commander deck, unless that tribe is super, super well supported because it just pumps all of your things. Also counts as a dwarf, so Depala pumps it. Dwarf Destinies is kind of an amazing card in any tribal commander deck. It just makes your creatures get completely out of control very, very quickly. If it gets 3 counters on it, all your creatures of that type get +3/+3, and it usually gets even higher than that. Brass Herald pumps the whole team like Adaptive Automaton, but it also lets us pull any dwarves off the top of our library into our hand. Obelisk of Erd will pump all of our dwarves, +2/+2, and Shared Triumph will give all of our dwarves +1/+1. So this pile is just sort of, it's vehicles as well as ways to make better use of vehicles. One of these is Start Your Engines, which this deck plays a ton of creatures. Sometimes it can just win the game, especially if you have a couple vehicles in play. Speedway Fanatic is not a dwarf. It's a human, but it can give vehicles haste, so it's in here. Aradara Express, if you can get this out early, it's pretty hard to stop, especially when it's a 9/7 with Menace. Things like that tend to happen when you have Depala in play. Ballista Charger, all of these are sort of our later game ways to get in damage, and Ballista Charger does it. It can also pick off small creatures. Demolition Stomper is just a huge, massive creature to deal with. Cultivator's Caravan is both a mana rock and a huge creature for our opponents to deal with. Bazaar Barge cycles itself while also being a large creature. Fleet Wheel Cruiser is nice because it can just suddenly get in for 5 out of nowhere. Oval Chase Dragster can get in for 6 out of nowhere. Sky Sovereign is, of course, incredibly strong. It's in Scene Playing Constructed right now, and we have it in this deck because it's probably the strongest card or creature we have in our deck. Renegade Freighter, also pretty good, especially when Depala's in play. And then we have Skyskiff. You'll notice no Smuggler's Copter. That's because this is a budget deck. So this is the deck. I'll play 3 games with it now on Magic Online, and you'll be able to watch those to see how the deck performs. So thanks for watching. If you want to make sure that you catch Commander on a budget each and every month, don't forget to subscribe. If you like this deck or this video in general, don't forget to click the like button. And if you have any comments about this deck, any suggestions for it, or criticisms or whatever, post them in the comments below.